This shit is absolutely going to change the entire world, and it is going to completely overtake the global financial system.
And instead of just asking Erik what he thinks about things, we're going to be examining and dissecting how he thinks about things.
Bitcoiners are basically all in agreement about like some really fundamental things about how the world works.
I'm just a shadow of a bigger man.
There's no better time to be alive right now, and there's no better place to be than in Denver.
His name is Erik Voorhees, and we're going to have a little fireside chat.
Blockchain and specifically cryptocurrencies are going to change how humanity works.
All your life, you can't save me. All your life, you can't save me. I will wait for my time.
Yeah, thank you guys for being here. This is fucking great to see this many people here in Denver.
I want to talk a little bit about the history of this meetup group. So it started in 2010, a guy by the name of Jordan. It was probably started Colorado Bitcoin Society. It was about 10 people meeting in I think it was a pizza shop, is that right? Yeah, a pizza shop. Sean, my co-founder at SALT, was one of those early guys there, along with a guy a lot of you guys know named Ben Ulrich. And that was back in 2012. They realized they needed a better space in the pizza shop, so Sean said, hey, I'm running this restaurant called Southern Hospitality. We can run the event right there. And from about 2012 to about July of this year, that was the major meeting place for this group. In that time, the whole space has evolved and changed and grown exponentially. Back then in 2012, Bitcoin was really the only cryptocurrency really worth talking about. Maybe even the only cryptocurrency. I don't know. Maybe I need to brush up on my history a little bit. But since then, the blockchain space has exploded, and now there's much more worth talking about than just Bitcoin. So when I took over this group, Colorado Bitcoin Society, one of my big goals was to make it a more blockchain agnostic meetup, something that focused more on the whole diverse, robust space of blockchain and not just one cryptocurrency being just Bitcoin. Now in the course of coming to meetups and getting involved in this community, I met some of these awesome guys, Kent, Corey, and Sasha. Either way, what we're going to be doing going forward is we are all going to be called Rocky Mountain Blockchain. Right? So I'm going to have these guys come up.
So our mission as the Rocky Mountain Blockchain Organization is be a catalyst, ignite our community's passion for blockchain technology. Our vision is Rocky Mountain Blockchain envisions an empowered community that understands, fosters, and appreciates blockchain technology's impact in our society. So that's the metric by which we are going to be evaluating, does this event make sense? Or what we're doing make sense? Do these sponsors make sense? That's our path moving forward. So that is the new Rocky Mountain Blockchain Organization. I'm super excited to have all of you as a part of it. Thank you for being here.
I'm sure a lot of you are aware of what's going on in the Bitcoin space right now with this hard fork business. And I'm sure if you're anything like me, you have just a little bit of an idea what's going on, but probably not at all. So I'm going to have Kent take the microphone, and he's going to talk for about 5 minutes just to have everyone a high-level view so we all have a deeper understanding of what's coming up in the terrain ahead of us in the Bitcoin space and the general wide blockchain space as well.
There's no better time to be alive right now, and there's no better place to be than in Denver. So to all you newcomers, welcome. You're in the right place. To familiar faces, it's good to see you. So the big topic of the moment, we happen to be meeting on the eve of Bitcoin's most pivotal day. And I don't think that's hyperbole. This is a real big deal. Essentially, what's going on, for those of you who haven't been following it too closely, Bitcoin historically grew nicely, and it was a fun place to be. There wasn't too much debate over where to take the project until the S word, scaling. The challenge with Bitcoin and all other blockchains is as follows. How do you become the Visa network in terms of payments? How do you process or transactions, thousands of transactions a second? Bitcoin can only handle a handful right now. So as it gets more popular, this poses a big problem. How do you make it scale? It's not as easy as just changing a few lines of code because unlike, say, Lyft, or I've been watching Silicon Valley, Hooli, or Pied Piper. It's not that simple when you're talking about a decentralized program or decentralized network. There's a lot of stakeholders that are making decisions here. We have miners processing the transactions and running nodes. We have users, and we have developers as well. So, long story short, I won't bore you guys with the technical details, but a solution was proposed called segregated witness 2x. Basically, what that is, the TLDR is let's make the blockchain, let's change the transactions a little bit differently, so all the verification stuff is moved to the side. It doesn't take up space. It leaves more room for transactions, and then, hey, we've kind of addressed the scaling issue. At the same time, there's certain stakeholders in the Bitcoin community who really just want more space. Let's add a lot more space. So a few months ago, a compromise was reached called SegWit 2x. And the gist of it is basically a lot of the community supported this idea. However, not everybody was on board. A lot of people think that, and a lot of influential players think that more space should be added. So instead of adding 2 megabytes, let's add 8. It seemed for a while that maybe that view lost out. However, it's not that easy. It's never that easy in crypto. It turns out that there's going to be a fork called Bitcoin Cash, and it's becoming active 6:20 a.m. tomorrow. So this is imminent. The question is, what's going to happen? Will this be a viable blockchain? For those of you familiar with Ethereum, there are a lot of similarities with Ethereum and Ethereum Classic here. There is a fork, and what will determine if this fork is viable is if miners support it with hashing power. What does this mean for you, the potential investor or the current holder of Bitcoin? I think the bottom line, if you have Bitcoin right now, I'm going to invoke a meme here, but head down to the Winchester, have a pint, and let all this shit blow over. I stole that straight from Reddit, but if you control your private keys, if you control your Bitcoin, just don't do anything. The fork will happen. You will definitely wind up with this Bitcoin Cash. Will it amount to anything? Perhaps, maybe not. What would be best for Bitcoin and the blockchain community overall? Who knows? But bottom line is, you'll have access to both if you're holding your private keys. If you have your money on an exchange, that isn't such a sure thing. Also, if you try to rush through some transactions like tomorrow morning when things are going crazy, that might be a mistake because it's not clear what would happen. So that said, it's exciting to see. Whatever happens is going to break or at least ease an impasse that's been happening for 2 years in Bitcoin. And it's exciting to see what's going to happen next. So that said, I'm going to actually hand it back over to Caleb. He's going to introduce our speaker for the evening. This is someone who is a founding father of the modern blockchain industry and a tireless advocate for human liberty, Erik Voorhees.
All right. Especially if you're new to this space and feel like you have no idea what's going on, just talk to any of us. If you'll find out really quickly, we love to ramble and on and on and on about blockchain. So it's not very hard to find someone to talk to you about it, and we'd love to talk to you. That's what this whole community is about. It's about giving you the tools to be skeptical, giving you the tools to not have to trust, and giving you the tools to inspect for yourself and decide for yourself whether something has merit. All right, so he helped start BitInstant in 2011. It was one of the very first blockchain-oriented businesses. He brought provable fairness to gambling with Satoshi Dice. And then in 2014, he founded ShapeShift, which, let me tell you, is awesome. Is the world's largest decentralized peer-to-peer cryptocurrency exchange in the world. It's the only place where you can go, not create an account, not identify yourself, and trade cryptocurrencies directly with another person anywhere in the world, also anonymously, instantly. It's a really cool space. It's called ShapeShift. His name is Erik Voorhees, and we're going to have a little fireside chat. So let's give him a round of applause. All right, Erik, thank you so much for being here. Cool. So the goal of this fireside chat, I want it to be a little bit different than maybe other talks that Erik, you've maybe seen Erik. You can go on YouTube and probably find, 30 talks you've been in, maybe something on that order. That's probably pretty conservative. The thought is to borrow a quote that is unattributed. I don't think anyone knows who said this first, but if you give a man a fish, he'll eat for a day. And if you give someone a fishing pole, they'll eat for the rest of their life. And what I want is to discover the intellectual equivalent of Erik's fishing pole. So what we're going to be doing, this is the first of a series, hopefully many, We're calling it methodical thought. And instead of just asking Erik what he thinks about things, we're going to be examining and dissecting how he thinks about things. So the next time you approach a new concept, or you're trying to learn about something, or you're trying to judge for yourself, you can have a little bit of that toolkit that Erik uses to examine things in his life. Sounds good? All right, well, so we're going to start it off with talking about something that we just heard about. One of the most probably controversial things to happen in, or goings on in Bitcoin in a while is this hard fork. You've been pretty vocal, almost on both sides of sometimes things. How did you approach the debate and the controversy surrounding the hard fork, and how did you evaluate those different factors?
Yeah, good question. So the hard fork is really just like a manifestation of the contentious difficulty with which this community has tried to figure out how to scale. And it's been really unfortunate to see groups of people who used to be friends and allies and partners in arms devolve into this like tribal warring mess. And this has happened over the last 2 years in Bitcoin. And ever since this controversy got started, I've generally tried to look at it from like, first of all, what is the best thing for Bitcoin, and also to realize that Bitcoin is only existent because of the community that supports it.
Okay.
And I think that way, perhaps because when I got involved in Bitcoin in 2011, the community was very tiny. I mean, like I went to the world's first Bitcoin conference, and half of this room was larger than that conference, and that was like the global conference of Bitcoin.
That was Bitcoin.
Yeah, we were all just amazed that there were actual people there, and it wasn't just a bunch of guys on the internet. I guess it still sort of is.
Where was that?
That was August of 2011 in New York City, which is ironic.
Yeah.
So from the very beginning, when you start with this little seed and it grows into what's now like a large forest, it was because a bunch of people really cared about it and really helped each other to build something important. So the sense of community has been really a key thing for me, and I've tried to like hold that in the back of my mind as I judge the technical merits of how to scale, because
Yeah, do you think that there's some of the values that you guys developed as a community then, back in 2011, do you think that those are being carried forward, in that the way that controversy is being approached now, is that being lost? And
it's largely been lost, and it's really sad. I mean, what we had back then was this sense of purpose, of the proverbial David and Goliath situation, where we were actually trying to like change the global financial system. And little disagreements we had didn't matter because we all knew that we were friends, and that's really dissolved to the point where people have lost friendships, businesses have fallen apart, and it's really sad to see. But it's just one of the challenges that this technology has come across.
yeah, definitely. What was the metrics by which you examined Bitcoin first and decided that this was something worth, or that had merit? Because I think when I first heard about Bitcoin, I thought that's a Ponzi scheme, or that's a scam, and like, much to my embarrassment, I was absolutely wrong, obviously. But you were one of the very first people to join in that community. So how did you evaluate Bitcoin as a new paradigm, as a concept?
So after college, I moved to Dubai, and this was in 2008, and from there, from across the ocean, I saw the global financial crisis happen, and I got very fascinated by it, and started really like just paying attention to how money worked and how banking worked, and especially central banking, and came pretty quickly to the conclusion that in a market economy, the most important good is actually money itself, and people don't think of money as a good, but it's not only a good, it is the most important. And so in a market economy, why does a government centrally plan and control the most important good? And that to me became self-evident, but I didn't know what the hell to do about it. So fast forward a couple years, and I had moved back to the US, and then I learned about Bitcoin, and I was like, wow, this is really weird. And I learned that it couldn't be shut down by anyone. There was no central organization or person behind it. And then I tried using it, and I actually like sent some Bitcoin to someone else, and it just worked. And I didn't have to like make an account or fill out a form. There was just like a certain magic to it, even in its crude state back then. And I think that most Bitcoin maximalists, if they just bought some Ethereum,
Yeah.
would not be maximalists anymore.
Was that the first currency you bought other than Bitcoin?
No, this was pre-Ethereum.
What was it? What was your first non-Bitcoin? What did you cheat on Bitcoin with?
It wasn't Dogecoin.
It wasn't Dogecoin? Much wow.
I'm amazed that that's still around. That's another thing I was wrong about.
Dogecoin, I know, right? I remember Dogecoin too, and be like, "This is a joke. It
is a joke
now." And then it's still
here, funny apparently,
laughing at me.
Yeah, I mean it's like a $50 billion or $50 million market cap at
Off
this
of a
point
meme.
on a stupid dog face. This is the magic of crypto.
Here's us being stubborn, talking about being changeable minds, like stupid Dogecoin. 10 years from now, it's gonna dwarf.
Yeah,
Bitcoin.
it'll be the winner, and we'll look really stupid about talking about it.
Yeah. So what was do you remember what it was?
I don't know. It might have been Litecoin. I mean, there were only a few back then. Might have been Namecoin. I don't really remember.
Okay.
Definitely was not Ripple.
Well, it didn't matter what it was. just in case. Okay. Let's talk about, given how you experienced changing your mind about something you believe very confidently, that's like a small subset of beliefs. You have this huge other set of beliefs that you currently have the same amount of confidence about as you had of being a Bitcoin maximalist. So how do you look at, or how do you approach your existing beliefs that you are still confident in? Do you allow space for being persuadable or persuaded on that? Or how do you leave the door open to that? And how do you not fall into being on the other side of the spectrum where you can't be changed?
Yeah. So I think in college, if you would ask me a question of like, what's my opinion on any subject, I would immediately have an answer, and I would have an opinion on it. And what I've learned is to abstain from having an opinion, and that there is value and wisdom in just like not taking a stance on things. And this, I think, combines with a much deeper understanding and appreciation for complexity. There are a lot of things that the human mind thinks it understands, but our minds are very limited, and there are variables that we don't know. There are variables that we think we know that are wrong. And there are so many complex systems all around us, and this is why central planners think that they can control markets, because they do not appreciate that fact that markets are these complex systems that you can't tinker with. So what I do to try to avoid being wrong is to try to not take as many affirmative statements or affirmative positions in the first place, and to try to have a really high bar. You know, if I see something happen multiple times, I will keep assuming it's coincidence until it's very clear that there's something there. I will try to always abstain from judging it or believing I know what it will do or how it will work until there's a critical mass of overwhelming evidence.
Okay.
And it's that waiting for overwhelming evidence that I think has made me both better at understanding complex systems and also just more humble about the world around me.
Yeah. I think that's a great perspective. Well, thinking about like the way that other people and other information comes at us, one thing I've noticed is that like in the controversy surrounding the hard fork, there's one person in particular that's been kind of a central figure in that. And while you've disagreed with his conclusions, you've also been very restrained in the way that you deal with the way other people disagree with him. In particular, ad hominem attacks and people attacking things in the past of people that don't really have anything to do with the debate at hand. So I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about how you evaluate and both ingest and digest the opinions of other people. Do you evaluate their experience? Do you evaluate just the pure logic of what they're saying in a somewhat objective sense? Or how do you approach, be it someone that you've never talked to before or someone who has a name in the space and a reputation?
So first is to understand that person's position at a very high level, to understand like what their core beliefs are, and to see if they have any of the same fundamental beliefs or principles or interests that I do. And if they do, then to realize and to keep in perspective that any disagreements we have are matters of detail, not of principle.
Of degree, not kind, maybe.
Yeah. And this is, I think, the tragic thing that people in the Bitcoin community have lost, because Bitcoiners are are basically all in agreement about like some really fundamental things about how the world works. They're much more similar to each other than they are to other people in the world, and that alone should encourage some kinship and some forgiveness and some patience and friendship. And you have to keep that. You have to keep that perspective. You have to know if someone is fundamentally in disagreement with you, like is that a violent, evil person? In which case I'm going to probably disagree with them pretty quickly. Or is that like someone who's pretty much like me, but we just have a few little details to sort out and to try to like listen to that perspective accordingly.
Okay. If you're trying to teach someone a concept that's complicated, or they disagree or don't understand, do you start with that common ground, that commensurability? Or do you start with something that you disagree on? How do you approach teaching a different concept to somebody else?
So if you're teaching someone that's open to that wants to learn what you're saying, keep things really high level and try to figure out what is most relevant to start with. And this is something that I've learned in Bitcoin. Like I'm not an engineer or a developer, and I do not understand blockchains on a level that most of the developers do. My ignorance of those details and that nuance has allowed me from the early days to understand at a higher level what other normal people that are not engineers would be interested in learning about.
Right.
And so keeping things at a high level, and once someone buys into the general concept and still wants to learn more, then start getting into detail. And that's sort of an art form that has to be learned over time. If you're trying to teach someone something who doesn't agree with you or who is combative or skeptical, you have to find common ground and present yourself as a friend. And if you find something that you do agree on, right, because any two people will find something they agree on.
Something common.
Find that and then argue from that point toward your conclusion, and lead that person through many things they agree with toward what you want to say. You'll fail anyway, right, because people don't change their mind on things very often, but that's a much more effective way to do it than to immediately start as a combative person.
What about learning? What about the other side of the coin? How do you approach learning a new concept, either in the instance of having someone to teach you, or in the instance of just approaching maybe the internet or a text for research?
I have learned that I learn very quickly things that I'm interested in, and I don't learn ever the things that I'm not. So, like in school, I took 80 years of French, and I can't speak French at all. And I wish I knew French, but I wasn't interested in learning it, and it just, my brain was not processing it. Bitcoin, which to most people is very complicated, I learned in a week. I studied it for a week, read a bunch of articles, and I knew it really well. I knew why it was important. I knew how it worked. I knew how often blocks happened and why there's variance in the blocks, and lots of little details that for most people they wouldn't care about. So I guess that's the one lesson here, that if you're trying to learn something that you just don't care about, stop doing that. You're wasting your time. Find the things that you're passionate about, and then you'll find that you learn them very quickly.
Awesome. All right, one last question, and then we'll go to the question and answer time. And this is not a question I gave you any heads up about, so I'm really interested to see how you answer it. I want you to make some high-level general predictions about the future of blockchain space, and then I want you to explain the thought process, that the why you believe this is where blockchain is headed.
Okay. So my general forecast has remained the same since I first read a Facebook post about Bitcoin, and that is that this shit is absolutely going to change the entire world, and it is going to completely overtake the global financial system. It is completely going to change how human relationships happen with each other, how business is done, and importantly, from a narrow perspective that I care about, it is going to replace government money. And is going to, by outcompeting it. And I think this is something that I'm very personally excited about. This is something that I just had a daughter a year and a half ago, and I am very excited that she will never have a bank account.
Do you feel confident in that
Yeah.
she will never have a bank account?
Yeah, for sure. There will probably,
Yeah. That's awesome.
I have to add some qualifiers because in 10 or 15 years when it might be relevant, companies like Coinbase will be the banks of the future. So she will have accounts with firms, but they will be based on honest money as opposed to fiat, and that will make all the difference. So that's, I sounded crazier when I said that in 2011 than I do today. Most people in the world still probably think that's a totally crazy assertion.
Especially since you didn't have a daughter back then. So
Yeah. Yeah, but blockchain and specifically cryptocurrencies are going to change how humanity works, and fiat currencies are going to be something that people in this room joke about with their grandchildren. It's going to be like one of those funny things that humans foolishly thought about and everyone just assumed. And there are examples of that, how we feel about our ancestors today. So that's my grand projection, and I'm quite confident in it still.
okay, this is maybe a side note, but I agree with you that I think the youth of today, the kids, 1 and 2 year old, may never see a fiat bank account. But I also think on that same point that we can speed along the growth of blockchain by helping drive adoption among young people, especially if you're just starting high school or if you're in middle school and you want to start accruing wealth at that age. You really don't have that much access to many banking services. How do you think that we can help young people today think about finances differently? I think about blockchain. Is that something that's worthwhile, or do you think there's potential there for for human beings to adopt financial concepts earlier? And if so, how do we do that?
I don't know. If someone doesn't understand money and finance, which is most people, you almost can't talk to them about Bitcoin yet, because anything you say that will demonstrate it as a successful technology, they will just see it as an investment. They won't understand why, and to them it'll come across as any number of another people pitching like the next big thing, the next great investment. You can't teach someone about Bitcoin until they understand money. But it's okay, because most of the world will start using Bitcoin without really understanding it. So I would, when I talk to like a young person or even an adult, I don't get into Bitcoin at all unless they really want to know, or unless they have a good financial understanding, because anything else will be superficial, and I feel wouldn't give credit, or wouldn't be appropriate.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I think we're going to wrap up our fireside chat with that excellent point. Let's give Erik a round of applause. Thank you, guys. This will give us about 4 extra minutes than we were planning on doing a little Q&A time. So does anybody have any questions they'd like to ask Erik?
How do you see Bitcoin integrating with like the current public markets in the future?
Yeah. So I've always been of the opinion that as Bitcoin grows, it will start pulling in larger and larger circles of finance. And there are some people that are into the crypto world that really don't like that view. They don't want to work with banks. They don't want to talk with anyone who was from the legacy financial system. And I think that's kind of foolish. Like, Bitcoin is the better product. To the extent that it connects with the broader financial system, it will pull people into it. So I'm very much all about, especially any companies that help do that, like Coinbase. A lot of people like to hate on Coinbase, but as a company, they have probably done more to help Bitcoin adoption than any other company in Bitcoin. So I fully support that mission, and it's kind of a crappy job that they have, but someone's got to do it. Glad it's not me.
You said you were a Bitcoin maximalist and you changed later. So how much of this group is a decentralization maximalist? Given other options and given other features of a cryptocurrency, would you sacrifice decentralization?
Yeah, so that's a great question. There are also a lot of people in Bitcoin and crypto who want to, the term is decentralize all the things. And they seem to have come to the conclusion that just because some things are super amazing when you can decentralize it, that implies that everything should be decentralized, and that's nonsense. There are a lot of things that shouldn't be decentralized, and a lot of things that are inefficient or that just don't work at all if they're decentralized. So I think decentralization should happen where it's economically efficient for it to be that way, and where there's a market demand. And that's something that doesn't need to be designed. Like, decentralized systems will fill in a marketplace wherever there's a need for them.
I'm gonna go over here, then we can come back over here.
You recently tweeted about dumping your Bitcoin Cash on this fork. Can you explain why?
Yeah. So that tweet probably deserved a longer blog post. Yeah, so the reason I'm going to sell all of my Bitcoin Cash, which is the fork happening tomorrow, is because I have seen this battle between these two warring factions for 2 years, and finally, like last few weeks, a semblance of compromise and common ground was organized with the SegWit 2x plan. It's not perfect, has its problems, but it is the best thing I've seen that actually has miner support and business support and support from many or most of the people, the actual users that I talked to. And that happened like a week or two ago, and it was really exciting. It was like this breakthrough moment where Bitcoin finally like started to make some progress through this controversy. And then this group goes and says, even though most of the industry has finally like reconciled this, we're going to go and fork off and change a couple of the rules. They have every right to do that, and I'm kind of glad the fork is happening because it may further help to settle the debate. So I don't call it an attack. I don't think that there's anything ethically or morally wrong with them doing that. But I'm also a market participant, and I want Bitcoin to be strong. I think that Bitcoin is going to come out of this fork stronger, and I'm going to help make that happen with the economic, power that I have. So the reason I posted that tweet was to help signal to the community in this time of all this noise, like where I, as a Bitcoin, CEO and early adopter, where I stood on the matter, because I have an opinion on it. So that was the purpose of the tweet. But should have been a blog post where I like explained this with more academic rigor.
As a continuation from the last question, I can understand your reasoning for supporting SegWit 2x and your commitment to it. But I know that there are a lot of people that signed the New York agreement that are openly discussing reneging on or not honoring their commitment to that agreement. So if the 2 megabyte hard fork doesn't happen, will you reverse your stance on Bitcoin Cash personally? And sorry for the second part, what is ShapeShift's stance on Bitcoin Cash and supporting that?
Yeah, great question. First of all, I don't think there are a lot of people that signed the New York agreement that are reneging on that agreement. Even someone like Roger Ver, who is much more affectionate toward BCC, toward Bitcoin Cash than many people, also publicly stated that he still will support SegWit 2x, as did Bitmain in the same way. So most or everyone who signed that agreement still plans to uphold it. If the 2x part doesn't happen, meaning the hard fork to a 2 megabyte block, which should happen sometime this fall, if that doesn't happen, I'll absolutely reconsider my position. Yeah. And ShapeShift's position is generally that if after the fork happens tomorrow morning, as long as it's just not dead on arrival, meaning as long as there's some market interest in trading it, which there probably will be, then we will add it to ShapeShift. So, I mean, the price of that asset should be set by the market, and ShapeShift's a great way to buy and sell digital assets. So ShapeShift can probably best serve the community by letting people trade this stuff.
Thanks a lot for all this.
Yeah, thank you guys for being here. This is fucking great to see this many people here in Denver. This is awesome.
So this question, and I'm still trying to figure it out in my own mind how it's supposed to go, but we've all seen a lot of geopolitical things happen recently. India, they had a bank run. Argentina, Venezuela. And then now in Europe, they're calling for Italy, and they're thinking about there's going to be a bank run, or there already has. So we're obviously headed in the right path with having an alternate currency that's not controlled. However, what happens when the powers that be, who control all of our devices and all of the technology essentially that we use to transact this currency, what happens there? I'm trying to see, like, if they block the app, Coinbase, for instance.
Yeah. So that's going to be the battle that defines our lifetimes. I mean, and by our, I mean anyone who's interested in this technology. That question is going to be what defines the next 20 or 30 years. I don't know the answer, but I know that it's a big obstacle. And while no government can shut down Bitcoin, they can certainly make it really obnoxious to use. They can vilify people that use it or trade it. They can throw all sorts of people in jail. They can cause lots of damage. I mean, that's what governments, that's one thing they're good at. But ultimately, the efficiency brought about by any two humans in the world being able to economically transact with each other without having to trust each other, I think that principle is too powerful to be stopped. I hope it is. I think it's similar to the ability for people to talk at distance, to send messages to each other. I don't believe that a government could shut down the internet either. Maybe temporarily, but like a new one would form. I think when there is enough intrinsic desire of people to interact with each other, and business and trade is one of those like fundamental things to humans, the efficiency that is brought to that and the honesty that is brought to that by Bitcoin, I think in the long term will win the day. And it'll win the day even more likely if the Bitcoin community actually like gets its shit together and stops these horrible bickering matches and actually like helps each other build this technology.
On that note, do you mind giving just 2-minute spiel on how important it is to hold your own keys?
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of new people to Bitcoin and blockchain here.
Yeah. So in Bitcoin, what Bitcoin allows you to have is total sovereignty over your money. But it doesn't force you to have sovereignty over your money. You can still let someone else hold your Bitcoin for you. And sometimes that works great. I mean, there's, again, a lot of people use Coinbase. It's a great way to get started and to buy and sell Bitcoin and to like learn how this stuff works. But especially if you have any considerable amount of Bitcoin, you have to understand the importance of being able, at least, to store those funds on your own private keys. And that means a hardware wallet, or that means a service like blockchain.info in which the private keys are held in your browser, or it means the Bitcoin Core client or a full node. There's a lot of ways to store Bitcoin yourself. It requires a little bit of personal responsibility, but I will say that no one should even buy Bitcoin or touch it until they have learned what that even means to hold Bitcoin on your own private keys. And again, you don't always have to do it with every Bitcoin you have, but you need to understand and appreciate what it means to be responsible for your own money and to not have to trust some other party. And tomorrow morning, when the fork happens, this will be a great example of that, because there will be services that have problems or cause trouble. Maybe some lesser trustworthy services that just like outright scam people. Who knows? If you hold your own keys, no one can do that. And that's kind of the point of Bitcoin. Yeah, I mean, this is one of the discussions we had from the beginning of Bitcoin time, is like, how do you get people to actually adopt this stuff and use it? And I've come to the conclusion that like you can't plan that. Basically, entrepreneurs build services that make this technology useful, and at the margins, people will find increasing numbers of uses for it. And that means at the margins of geography, right? So Bitcoin is picking up momentum in larger and larger swaths of the world. And it means at the margin in terms of someone who already uses Bitcoin for one thing, learning that they can use it for another. And that's a very organic and complex process that you can't really plan. But it's okay. You don't have to plan it. This stuff is better than banks, and that will just unfold naturally.
Do you think this is going to cause problems as far as trust goes and decision making and governance factors in play? And do you think people will flock towards a different currency because of this happening again and again and again, if it does? So
yeah, good question. So the fork happening tomorrow doesn't change anything about what Bitcoin could have done any point in the past. So Bitcoin, one of its great things is that it is open source code that anyone can just copy and replicate and paste into something new. So anyone can fork at any time. The reason the one tomorrow is significant is because there is a significant amount of hash power. I don't think it's a majority, and it may be low single digits, but that's still significant. A significant amount of hash power and users want to fork. And when that is organized, it can happen at any time. So that's not new. And absolutely, if the fork happens tomorrow and it gets significant traction, however you want to define that, there's going to be every media outlet in the world totally confused about this. Millions of people are going to become totally confused, like what's Bitcoin, what's Bitcoin Cash, what the hell is this? I'm just staying away from it. There will be a lot of short and maybe medium-term damage, but that's okay. Like the long-term value of this stuff might actually be strengthened by the ability of conflicting factions to break off into their own asset, and for that for the market to kind of decide what it wants to use. And this would have been theory like a year and a half ago, but after the Ethereum fork that had some similarities to this, we see two assets now both worth more than Ethereum was before the fork. The communities went in their different directions, and their disagreements no longer cause them to spend all day arguing with random strangers on the internet. So I'm not scared of the I'm not scared of the Bitcoin fork. I mean, the price could drop to $800 tomorrow. It's fine. It could be really volatile and crazy in the short term, but long term, I think it's a really important feature of the system to be able to split when there's an irreconcilable difference.
So to bring it a bit back to how Mr. Voorhees thinks. You have taken a lot of interesting opportunities along your way. I am wondering, what are you currently working on or preparing? What are you doing in the future?
Yeah, I mean, ShapeShift is. I've been working on ShapeShift for 3.5 years, and like that's the longest time I've dedicated to anything, other than my wife. So, ShapeShift, when it started, I think a lot of people again thought I was a little crazy because altcoins were so tiny and not significant. But clearly, the blockchain industry has branched out to the point where an asset exchange that is built for native blockchains, meaning it doesn't involve or tangle itself with banking at all, is really crucial. So I'm hoping to take ShapeShift to be a multi-billion-dollar company and one of the leading enterprises of the financial future that we're trying to build. So that's my project, and that'll be my project for quite a long time.
Did you guys get funding for ShapeShift? And can you describe that experience and how many pitches did it take?
Yeah, good question. This will inevitably get into a discussion of token sales, but so I started ShapeShift with my own money, put in some capital, raised some money from Roger Ver, who I consider a friend, and so he was an early investor. And then we built out the prototype, raised a seed round in early 2015 of $1.5 million. And then a year later, we did a convertible note round of $2 million. And then starting last October, I started going out to raise like a real Series A. And because at that point, it was clear that like this was really growing and we could totally use the capital. And that took like 6 months. I think I talked to about 120 VCs, and then it all kind of came together, and we closed in March. We raised $8.4 million, and $8.4 million like used to be like a big amount to raise. And like we closed in March. So right in March was when Ethereum was starting to really rally, and these token sales started getting really crazy. And like now we're at the point where people are raising $20 million, $50 million. A few of them have raised $200 million, and they're not doing no work. Like there's a lot of stuff that goes on behind the scenes to make any kind of token sale happen. But I would be lying if I said I wasn't like a little bitter about it. But I can't be upset because this is just one more example of how awesome this technology is. Like one of the killer use cases of blockchains are to issue tokens. And one of the early ways to issue a token is to assign it value in a company or privileges in a company, and for that to become a liquid digital asset. That's absolutely going to change finance itself, just that concept. So I'm thrilled to see that happening. I'm thrilled to see the token and the token sale market going off. 9 out of 10 of the projects will totally collapse and fail, but that's true of any kind of venture situation. So I think it's great. I just wish I had raised money a little later.
Does anyone not know what an ICO is? Wow.
No one.
Everyone knows what an ICO is.
Oh, there's
one guy. All right, so it's like cryptocurrencies and Kickstarter. Had a baby. Yeah. All right, cool. Wow, that's really cool to see that many people. Maybe that's why they're doing so crazy.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, You guys, this has been such an overwhelming success. I really appreciate everyone's participation, showing up on time, and being a great audience, great listeners, and asking awesome questions of Erik. Again, thanks to all of our sponsors. Keep an eye out for the next event. We're going to keep this going, guys. Thank you.